Vertigo 2 is, without a single ounce of doubt, the best virtual reality game I've ever played. It blew all of my expectations completely out of the water, and shames every single title in the genre. And this game was almost entirely made by just one person as a passion project. It's simply a masterpiece, and there's no other way to put it. Now, yes, while I know that these are very, very big claims to make, especially considering how picky I am with VR and relentlessly in love I am with Boneworks, but even though Boneworks will continue to be my favorite game of all time due to its indescribable charm, I can no longer say that it is the definitive VR game. The game has finally come to dethrone it after 3 years, and while considering that you, probably, almost certainly haven't picked it up yet, I recommend you click off this video now and go play it for yourself, because I'm about to spoil the tar out of the game's best moments. The moments where you open a door and see something absolutely incredible. When you make your way out of the darkness and you're floored. Those moments where the game's world immerses you. This is Vertigo 2. Now before we start, even though I keep saying that this is the best virtual reality game in my opinion, I'd like to not make any comparisons to other games in this review, including the first Vertigo, which I also recommend playing before you play its sequel. In almost all of my reviews up until this point, I've made constant comparisons to other games, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, but since this video will be a continuous onslaught of praise towards the game, I think it'd be best to keep the video self-contained and compliment Vertigo 2 in its own right. As you can see, this game is absolutely stunning in every conceivable way. The atmosphere can be exciting and action-packed, and then suddenly horrifying, then epic and cinematic. Vertigo 2 easily tackles and nails all of its set pieces and cinematic locales. Most of the time, you're just a tiny, insignificant observer. The player can be trying to get to their destination, and then you're suddenly surrounded by opposing alien races fighting each other. It's not your fight, but it suddenly becomes such. There's actual wildlife and ecosystems and opposing alien forces clashing into each other regardless of your presence. This illusion creates an incredible feeling of immersion, as if the alien planet is a real place with real creatures that are just going about their life and that your involvement makes no difference to them. You don't matter. And then in the very next level, you're chosen by some ancient god king to lead an assassination mission against a communist rebel officer and then end up getting in a one-on-one sword fight with him on top of a mountain overlooking the underground city. The game doesn't get stale at all throughout its meaty runtime because of the constant change of pace and tone. The scale of the game is easily unmatched, however, and at times is completely overwhelming. It's a linear game with point A to point B level design, but with its scenic views and VR itself, makes it feel absolutely massive. Lately, in my opinion, there's been too many AAA games being shoved out there that are going for big for the sake of going big. Starfield, Zelda, stupid RPG game, and people are understandably both overwhelmed and burnt out. Vertigo 2, even with the massive scope of the game and overstimulating set pieces and stakes, is a 10-hour-long, hyper-focused, linear, single-player adventure game. So when I say that this game is massive, don't worry, that's a good thing. A really, really good thing. Also, yes, music good, by the way, if you couldn't tell. You know, music's really good. It's also composed by Zach, who did literally everything for the game, so, good job, you know, it's pretty good, you know, it's alright, I guess, you know, it's pretty good. The story in Vertigo 2 is awesome in every way. It's grand and cinematic, with high stakes and powerful threats. You're a human that got teleported to another dimension and you're trying to get back home, but end up getting involved in a giant war between alien races. At least, that's what I think the plot's about. I mean, I'm not exactly sure, because no one's talking about this game. That's super underrated, so I can't really find, like, ending explained videos or anything. There's plenty of interesting and funny characters to help liven to help liven the world and convince you that it's a real universe you're stepping foot in. Some of them being Brian, the selfish and greed-ridden ally of yours, Henry, the main antagonist, obsessed with completing a ritual to revive a defeated intergalactic cult with a super anomaly. Again, that's at least what I thought was happening. And my favorite, Officer 13, voiced by, wait...
Let's see if I can't provide a bit of stimulation.
Wait, that's Gabriel In all seriousness, though, I went through the entire game not realizing that he was voiced by Gianni until I started hearing him yelling during the final boss fight, and then I immediately knew. I know that yell anywhere. Even though I wasn't entirely certain of what was going on at times, it seemed like a well-written story to me. Decent amount of dialogue, but not an obnoxious amount. Lots of visual storytelling, which I love, especially in Chapter 15. Great cinematic set pieces, in-game cutscenes. It's a good campaign. But of course, a campaign has to have good levels and good level design to boot. Now, funnily enough, Zach, the main developer of the game, prides himself in anything but level design. But the levels in this game are pretty darn great. Chapter 16 was my personal favorite, being a short but really trippy, mind-altering journey between different dimensions, and the chapter title card gave me a huge burst of dopamine. In the same chapter, I was placed in the woods at night with my flashlight and then became very, very scared, believing it was about to turn into a horror game, since up until that point the game has done its fair share of trying to be scary. I found a road, believed I was back on Earth, and then this happened. Good stuff, Zach. Yes. Even though the chapter technically only lasts like 5-10 minutes, it was my favorite because it took the grandness and cinematic style of the game and cranked it to an extreme for a short period of time. It reminded me of Awkward Dimensions Redux if it was in VR, or a liminal horror map. Most of the levels I'd say are pretty meaty in length and content, but some chapters like 18 and 16 are just bridges to big events and exist solely for plot with almost no gameplay inside of them. Personally though, I thought the level design was great in Vertigo 2, and basically all the levels I'll remember instantly from seeing their previews. Now, even though that this is what I claim to be the single greatest VR game of all time, I have a few problems with it, mostly being just nitpicks that aren't the game's fault, but one problem I did have was the difficulty and flow of the game. Like, for example, I killed the final boss in my second attempt, yet look how many deaths I have. Vertigo 2 is a really, really tough challenge. The Sap Lord, the General, the Ignosaur, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, being the hardest in my opinion, all took me easily 5 to 10 attempts to kill. But most of my deaths came from enemy encounters, which ranged from easy to irredeemable nightmare. The problem that I'm trying to describe to you, though, is actually the fact that there were some parts in the game that were frustratingly hard for no reason, and then the game immediately went back to easy mode. In the span of 3 levels, it went from hard to easy to platforming level. I agree that the game should in fact have constant changes of pace throughout the runtime, but I also would have liked to see a more steady increase of difficulty. But hey, you know, I mean, it's better than the flat lines of difficulty at Boneworks, am I right? Speaking of bosses, Vertigo 2 has bosses. Yeah, fully fleshed out multi-phase boss fights. And they're really good too. Some are harder than others, yeah, but the Seer, Centaur, and Fishbrain were really effortless to beat. And then you have the Ignosaur, which killed me like 15 times and is the very first boss you fight. The Sap Lord was my favorite boss, being great thematically in design and difficulty. Everything about it was pretty much just flawless. And the Communist Robot was an alright challenge, but mostly just really fun. What I love about these boss fights are the fact that, well, they're bosses in VR. That's never really explored or even attempted, and it was the biggest selling point for the original Vertigo. And here, it's even better and more utilized. Bosses help expand the already extreme, grand feeling of the game, on top of the beautiful and absolutely stunning imagery and environments. Like opening the reactor door, walking out of Nani's cave, and exiting the cave on the boat were all incredible and extremely memorable, breathtaking moments. I just kept getting impressed and overwhelmed over and over and over again. Now, why am I bringing this up again? Because this is me transitioning into talking about the set pieces of the game. For example, you ride a boat into an underground city and are led to the supposed king of the land. You're told there's rebels in a war with the people, and you're tasked with leading an assassination mission, and you spend the next half hour with the robot army slowly carving out a path in this massive city while bombs and gunfire are going off in all directions, and you're completely swarmed with enemies. This is, in my opinion, only the second most impressive part of the game. The most impressive being when you have to disable the reactor core's defenses so you can get in on the second to last level. There's a massive 4-section arena arena, and about every single enemy you've ever encountered returns to stop you, and it's a really, really challenging and extremely epic and climactic ending. There's also this, which, I mean, are you watching this right now? This is awesome. I'd say that most of the game is more level focused than linear, but the moments when the game just releases you into a massive environment feels amazing and very unforgettable. Quickly, before I go about how the guns work in Vertigo 2, complaints. I have very, very few. In terms of glitches and bugs, the only ones I experienced were when a few enemies were clipping, Brian not knowing how to walk in the beginning, and not being able to grab these stupid handles. But my personal problems with Vertigo 2 aren't at all about what it did, but what it didn't do. Climbing, interactive environments, and melee, particularly stabbing. These are what I love about, you know, that one game. But not a single one of these attributes are present here or really even attempted. Sure, there's ladders, which are the best of any VR game, by the way, but I can't climb a random shelf for fun or scale a wall because I feel like it. I can't grab a random object off the ground and use it to kill an enemy in 10 different ways. Here's the thing though, these mechanics aren't here because they don't need to be. Vertigo 2 is a linear 10-hour campaign with a story, not a sandbox. And I'm sitting here spoiled by Boney Boy, picking about how there's no sandbox mechanics present in an action-adventure game. The game didn't need any of this stuff because it'd be useless to implement. I just like those things, that's all. In fact, what Vertigo 2 tries and it succeeds at doing is infinitely better than what Bone Game did. So the immersive small details of interactivity and physics for a game like this, again, wouldn't have been worth the time to introduce. There's already plenty, and I mean plenty of level to detail, so trust me, the developer wasn't being lazy with the game in the slightest. I'm just nitpicking. Now enough whining, guns, gaming. First off, no ammo boxes. It's automatically generated and you can hold up to 3, depending on the weapon. And the time to generate more ammo is longer for some than others. So not only do you have to worry about managing ammo or inventory, but you're forced to constantly switch weapons, which is really good. But even though the ammo functions this way, it still allows for satisfying reloads and really unique ones too. There's a ton of weapons and apparently even more than this, but I didn't find any secret weapons on my casual playthrough, so To name a few, you have a pistol that you'll never touch again after getting the shotgun, revolver, which is basically a one-handed sniper rifle, a death ray, and of course, the Blafaladacious Nesticles, which can do this. Epic. The weapons are decently balanced, and all of them, I'd say, have their use late game, besides the starter pistol and SMG. They can also be upgraded over time at upgrade stations, which thankfully held itself back from being a convoluted skill tree. It was simple and easy enough to understand and get around. But while ammo is infinite in supply and doesn't need managed, health absolutely does, and for the better, I think. There's Half-Life-esque health stations when you're in facilities, which are really fun to use. And there's portable heals. One-time use syringes from the facilities, and fruit in alien territory that can be half-eaten and stored. This approach to health is pretty great and factors into the high difficulty of the game. I've never personally been a fan of infinitely generating health once you're low, and this approach feels very much like you'd find in an action-adventure shooter. Half-Life. But even if the game is on paper a relatively simple first-person shooter adventure, it's the absolute first of this magnitude I've seen in VR. Alex played it too safe. Boneworks' story mode was based around a sandbox-type game with brain-dead enemies. But Vertigo 2 is a fully fleshed-out action-adventure with boss fights, storytelling, a cast of characters, and stunningly gorgeous levels crafted by the creative hand of a single developer fueled by a passion to create. Zach had a vision and was committed to finishing it and allowing it to see the sunlight. And he just so happened to create a video game that absolutely none other in the VR scene can possibly stand a chance against. Now, please, do yourself a favor and buy this game. It's worth every penny, and even after being spoiled so much up until this point, it'll still provide you many, many memorable moments and surprises. Support Zach and his team because this is a labor of love of years and years of passionate work, and it deserves every ounce of praise it has received and much, much more on top of that. Also, I can finally say that there's a reason to get PSVR 2. Vertigo 2 is getting a physical and digital release for it, so... Finally, congrats PlayStation, you finally did it, you finally have a system seller, yay! Yay, you finally did it, yay! Come on.